Okay, right. Hopefully I've got my camera going and you can hear me, and hopefully you can also see the presentation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's good morning here from, actually, I'm based in the UK today, so it's an early start for me. But luckily I've had some breakfast, so I'll be all right. So anyway, let's just get started. This is what I'm going to be talking about today. So it's the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. So that's the latest edition of the TOGAF Standard, the TOGAF framework. And I'm also talking about the TOGAF Certification Portfolio because we've made a number of changes to our certification program to support the 10th edition. So this is the agenda that we'll be talking through. So there are three things I want you to three takeaways that I hope you'll get from this talk. Obviously an overview of the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. Now there's a lot in the 10th edition, so I couldn't cover it all in a few minutes. So it's a very brief overview. We'll be looking at the TOGAF Certification Portfolio and then the new learning paths, the learning paths that are available to you that actually support the 10th edition training. But before I do that, I just want to tell you a little bit of background on the Open Group, because I understand maybe not everybody's heard of us. So just tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We're a global consortium that enables the achievement of business objectives through technology standards. So that's what we're about, is enabling the business through our technology standards. We have over 900 membership organizations. Our membership is organization based, and those are from 46 countries. We have staff and local partners in 12 countries. And our members, they include customers, systems, solution vendors, tool vendors, academics, consultants. So it's a wide mix of member organizations from across many industries. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how we're structured. So we're structured into what we call forums, work groups, and consortia. These are the forums. So these are basically special interest groups. And there are a number of different interest groups, forums, as we say, and they range and they do different topics. So as you can see on the top left, we have the Archimate Forum, which looks after the Archimate specification. That's the modeling language for enterprise architecture. The Architecture Forum itself, which looks after the TOGAF Standard, and that's where I will be focusing today. And we have another bunch of different forums. So we have Open Process, IT for IT Real Time. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see we have a range of forums basically looking at different topic areas. We also have underneath there, you see some work groups. Now they're basically interest groups that are open to all members. The forums are only open to members who sign up for that specific interest group. The work groups are available to everybody. And we have some that are looking at what we call the digital portfolio, service-oriented architecture, government EA, and a couple of other projects. We also have some industry vertical areas. So we have a healthcare forum and a minerals, mining and minerals forum. We also have a couple of consortia that we manage, which are basically for US military activities with the Department of Defense. So we have one that looks at, called FACE, that looks at avionics, and another one called SOSA that looks at sensor systems. Now, how do we develop our standards? Basically, we bring the Open Group members together, as I mentioned, into these interest groups, known as forums and work groups, to develop standards, and then we develop from that certifications. We have certifications in a number of different areas, from process through to people, and so on. And this is just to show you how we try to bring a feedback loop into our membership. So the Open Group members come in, they work in the forums and work groups, they develop the standards, we develop certifications, and then that enables market adoption, because obviously without standards being adopted by the market, they're really just sitting on the shelf. So it's very key that we enable that market adoption. And then often that will bring in new members. We've had some members that look at how we've been developing standards. For example, when we developed the FACE standards, some of the participants in that standard then said, we'd like to follow your model of how you did that, but for open process automation. So we formed an open process automation forum. And obviously we collaborate with other standards bodies and consortia. One of the things we try not to do is to duplicate effort. We prefer to work with and build upon other standards. So that was a brief introduction into the Open Group, just to tell you who we are. Now let's get into the main webinar today. And the first thing we wanted to today was a brief look at the TOGAF Standard 10th edition and some of its key features. As I mentioned, we can't cover it all in the short session, but hopefully we'll give you some of the key sort of features of the standard. So what we'd heard with the previous versions of the standard was that practitioners wanted more guidance, better guidance, and topical guidance. So that's been a key change in the 10th edition, is basically to add more of that guidance. And the way we've done that is by actually updating the structure. So we've actually gone from what was a single book, which some people might call, a monolithic sort of approach, to a modular structure. So I'll show you in a minute. We've actually gone out to from a 1 book to now 26 books, and I'll explain how we did that. And that's enabled us to extend the content. So we're able to extend the content into much sort of broader areas besides what was just the core standard in the past. Let's look at that modular structure. Where can you find the standard? Well, the standard sits in something that we call the TOGAF library. So if you go to www.opengroup.org and you go along the top of the site, you go along the top bar on your right, you'll see a link to library. That gets you into something that we call the Open Group library. And what you'll see in the top of the Open Group library, you'll see basically those 5 boxes, 5 different colored boxes. And the one on the left is the TOGAF library. So you can then pop into that and you can start to discover the content that we've got in what we call the TOGAF ecosystem. Now in that library, we have the standard as well as a load of supporting documentation. So we have white papers, guides, reference cards, so on. Now, if you look at the standard here in this diagram, so that's the sort of the central green box there, you can see the TOGAF standard. That has 2 different types of categories of content. There's what we call the TOGAF fundamental content, so on the left there. Now that's stable and enduring. And then we have on the right the TOGAF series guides. And I'll talk a little bit about those. Now, the idea with the TOGAF series guides is that they are giving a lot more guidance now. The TOGAF fundamental content is basically the what, and that's almost equivalent to what was the old standard. And then the TOGAF series guides give the how. And the idea is we can add more how-to information and change and evolve the how-to information as time progresses. And we'll look a little bit more at that. This is just to show you another view of the modular structure. So I mentioned there are 6 documents that we call the TOGAF fundamental content. Those are shown there, basically equivalent to the old 9.2 standard, but we've sort of modularized it out into 6 separate documents for ease of maintenance and future evolution. And then to that, we've actually added 20 TOGAF series guides. And we expect this set to grow over time. So this is what we actually produced last April. I know there's a few additions to this already in the pipeline. So we're expecting maybe in another month's time, there may be 2 or 3 more additional TOGAF series guides. Now we can package this, and we have packaged this set in a number of different ways. So you can get the, what we call, if you look here on the bottom left, is the online digital edition. So there's a sort of a graphical entry point that you can click on, and then that takes you into the sort of the textual version of the digital edition. You can also buy hard copy, and we also have PDF downloads. Now, continuity has been a key driver. So if you're familiar with the 9.2 standard and you take a look at the TOGAF fundamental content, you will recognize many of the familiar elements. So you'll see the architecture development method, you'll see catalogs, matrices, you'll see the partitioning model and so on. So that's all very familiar. We've basically evolved it and revised and reorganized it. So as I mentioned, we split it out now, what was a single document from basically 9.2 into six documents that comprise the fundamental content. And they're supported by the TOGAF series guides that give the sort of how you can actually apply the fundamental content to different sort of scenarios and use cases. The TOGAF series guides, as I mentioned, they provide the how-to. They cover a range of topics from general how-to and guidance on establishing an EA team to domain-specific material. And I'll just show you quickly in the next 2 slides a very high-level overview of the topics that we cover in the TOGAF series guides. So general how-to, we have what we call the practitioner's approach to basically using the ADM, to developing an EA following the ADM. That's written by experienced architects from the Architecture Forum. So basically giving you advice about how you can apply the ADM to developing an enterprise architecture. We have focus on digital technology, the digital enterprise. So we have a couple of guides on that area. In domain specific guides, we have a lot of guides around business architecture, very rich set of information there, a rich set of guidance, data and information architecture. Agility is another area that we focused on in the 10th edition and have added a couple of guides there as well. We also have a set of reference models. So 6 of the documents are different reference models. Some of those existed before, so they existed at the same time as 9.2, but there are a couple of new ones that we've added, such as the digital business reference model and the government reference model. We also have now a separate guide that addresses how you establish and evolve an EA capabilities. That's how you set up your architecture practice. So that's aimed at the TOGAF leader. And so that's what we call the TOGAF Leaders Guide. So how can you get started with the standard? Well, the good news is we actually have a white paper. So if you went to the Open Group Library and you looked in our white paper section and you looked, there is an actual getting started with the 10th edition, Introduction to the 10th TOGAF Standard 10th edition. You can also get to this if you go to the online digital edition. On the entry page, we have the links. So this explains, the motivation for how we actually restructured the standard and how we made various revisions and new additions. It includes a section about how you can get started. So that's a couple of different viewpoints, how if you're approaching the standard for the first time, or maybe you're coming back to the standard from 9.2, it gives you advice about how to get started using the standard. It also contains some detailed release notes for changes to what was the fundamental, what was the 9.2 standard that became the fundamental content. So if you're interested in exactly what changed from 9.2 to the 10th edition, you can also find that out from this document. So as I mentioned, we have a digital edition, so an online digital edition. Now, this is designed to make it easier to navigate the expanded content. Obviously, with 26 documents now, it's a wide range of material. So you can go to this URL and you can start to explore and navigate the content. And just to show you here, once you've gone through the graphic layer, you get into the text of the digital edition. So we have sort of navigation information down the left. This is the introductory page. As I mentioned, it has a link here, how to get started, that takes you into the white paper, also tells you where to locate PDF downloads and so on. One thing that's new with the online digital edition is the ability to take feedback on every page of the standard. So if you look at every page of the standard, there's a little couple of icons in the top left, little comments or bug icon, if you like, that you can click on, and that will pop up a feedback form, and they will pre-fill some of the information, and then you can basically give us feedback, and that will go back directly to the standard developers and gets filed as an issue for them to look at, so they can consider it, for a future edition, or maybe it's pointing out an error. We've had about 40 or 50 comments so far. Some have been sort of editorial errors where we make, a slight typo that we're able to fix. Other things make suggestions maybe for changes that will need consideration in the future by the standards developers. So that was a very brief look at the standard. I'd like now to talk about the certification portfolio. So what does the portfolio cover? Well, the TOGAF certification portfolio includes what we call the TOGAF 9 certifications. Now, they're going to continue to be supported going forward, and also new certifications and certification credentials based on the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. So people do ask us, is the TOGAF 9 certification program going away? And the answer to that is no, it will remain supported for as long as there is market demand. It's widely referenced in the sort of job searches and so on. So it's widely used at the moment. And the Open Group will continue to support that for as long as there is market demand. Now, you'll see it talks about certifications and certification credentials. You're probably wondering what's the difference. It's basically down to the size of learning. A certification is typically a multi-day event, so it's multi-day amount of learning. A certification credential is basically our way to chunk up smaller amounts of learning. So it can start from as little as 3 hours and up. And I'll show you some of the differences, the different learning paths that we've got. So now when we started obviously with the 10th edition, we've, as I mentioned, there's a broad range of material. Now, what we could have done is to say, right, well, we'll just do, a TOGAF foundation, a TOGAF 10 foundation, maybe, and a TOGAF 10 certified. But the problem with that would be a very broad range of material. So it wouldn't be very deep. We'd have to go very shallow to try and cover all of that. And that really wasn't what we needed to achieve. So what we've done with the 10th edition is basically looking at this funnel. If you look at this diagram, we've taken the 10th edition, we've sort of put it through a funnel, and then we're defining what we call multiple bodies of knowledge. Now, a body of knowledge is basically a set of learning, a syllabus that's related to a specific skill set or competency. So if we go along this diagram here from the left, we've defined what we call a body of knowledge for the business architect, so for BA, the business architecture, one for EA, so for enterprise architects, so that's the enterprise architecture body of knowledge. We have a couple of what we call specialist bodies of knowledge. Now, they relate to specific TOGAF series guides, and I'll explain a little bit about what they are. Basically, we have an Agile Specialist and a Digital Specialist, and we now also have a body of knowledge just for the leader, so on that one TOGAF series guide that I introduced. And the purple box on the right, that's to show that there are potentially additional bodies of knowledge that we will add. And obviously, for each body of knowledge, we have a certification. So we've got one standard coming in, defining multiple bodies of knowledge, leading to multiple certifications and actually certification credentials that we support for the 10th edition. So this is the current portfolio before we introduce the changes for the 10th edition. So for those of you not familiar with these sort of images here, these are what we call open badges. So when you get a certification, you also get what we call a digital credential. That includes an open badge, and it's issued by our partner called Credly. The good thing about this is it's digitally verifiable. So you can go to the Credly site and you can click on your badge, and it will tell, or an employer can click on your badge and see it's verified that you've got that certification. It's also very easy to share on social media, such as LinkedIn, to have all your certifications. Now, the top badges there are what we call the certification badges. As I mentioned, there are certifications and certification credentials. And the teardrop badges, the blue badges, they are the certification credentials. So they're basically smaller chunks of learning. And for example, the one on the right, integrating risk and security, is as little as 3 hours. And these are the new additions. So what we've introduced for the TOGAF Standard 10th edition is 3 certifications and 4 certification credentials. This is another view of the portfolio. So if you look at this view of the portfolio, the white boxes are those that are based on TOGAF 9 certification, so against the 9.2 standard. The dark sort of greeny blue boxes are the 10th edition, and there is one box that applies to both, which is the integrating risk and security. We have a couple of empty boxes on there just to show that there is scope for future editions. So now let's just talk about the learning paths. If you're familiar with TOGAF 9 certification, this will look familiar. There are 2 ways to do it. You can come down from the standard. You have a choice to do either stepwise development, so in which case you would take the TOGAF 9 Part 1 exam, followed by the Part 2 exam, or you can take both essentially at once, go straight to the higher level, and that's by taking a combined exam. Okay, so that's the learning path that exists and will continue to exist today for the TOGAF Standard version 9.2. And what we've done for the 10th edition is to basically add similar sort of shaped learning paths. So if we look at the 10th edition, coming down the left, as I mentioned, we've got multiple bodies of knowledge. So in the certification view, there are 2 certification paths. There's the EA track, Enterprise Architecture, shaped very similar to what we have for TOGAF 9. So again, a choice to do it either stepwise or to take the 2 parts together. And then also what we've got is what we call a bridging path. So if you're at the TOGAF 9 certified level, you can come across from the left there from TOGAF 9 certified, you can take the bridge across to the right and get to TOGAF Enterprise Architecture Practitioner. We also have from the TOGAF Standard 10th edition another certification path down, and that's what we call, that's the business architecture track. Now, at the moment, we just have foundation there. So when we looked at the TOGAF series guides, we looked at the bodies of knowledge that are available. We don't have enough right now to have a higher level for TOGAF business architecture. It's a very rich certification in itself, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So those are the certification learning paths. And if we look at the certification credential learning paths, we have the 3 new certification credentials. Now, the good news is they are supported as learning paths both for TOGAF 9. So it's a learning path from what we call TOGAF 9 Foundation on that side. So it's basically TOGAF Foundation and up is a prerequisite for these certification credentials. And also you can come in from the 10th edition. So the idea is if you're already existing, if you've got an existing TOGAF 9 certification and you're interested in these new certification credentials, as long as you've got TOGAF 9 Foundation, you can go and you can take these smaller chunks of learning and earn your certification credential badge. And you can also come in from, if you're new to the program, just come in straight to TOGAF EA Part 1, get the EA Foundation and take the certification credential. And I'll talk a little bit more in the next sections about what's in these learning paths. So these were the 3 certifications that we've covered. So EA Practitioner, Foundation Practitioner, and then BA Foundation. If you recall, so this is the body of knowledge for enterprise architecture. If you remember, when we looked at the standard, there were basically 26 documents. As I mentioned, it would be too much for someone to, expected to study all 26. So the actual body of knowledge for EA is actually drawn from 12 of those. Now, the scissors indicate that we take a slice from some of those. It doesn't cover you. The syllabus actually picks, so what we call learning outcomes from parts of the document. So, for example, if you're an enterprise architect, you would need to know some of what's covered in the leader's guide, but not all. There is a separate certification credential that covers all of the leader's guide. So that's how we build a syllabus. These are the learning paths. So as I mentioned, EA practitioner can be approached in 2 ways. The top line shows if you're coming from TOGAF 9 certified, that would be the bridging path that we have shown. Otherwise, you can take it in 2 steps, or you could take the combined exam as well. I have not shown that on here. In addition, for TOGAF EA practitioner, we have something called an applied practitioner achievement badge. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. That's basically if you attend an accredited course, you are able to take some practical exercises, and then if you complete those satisfactorily, you can get this additional badge. So let's just run through the certifications, a very quick look at the certifications. As I mentioned, foundation is the sort of first step if you're doing stepwise development down the EA track. As it's a foundation, as you would expect, this is all about the fundamental concepts, getting the common language, a basic understanding of EA. And obviously it's a prerequisite if you want to go to the practitioner level and you weren't already TOGAF 9 certified. So this is the target audience. So basically we're looking either for individuals who want to do stepwise development or individuals who are working with enterprise architects or in an organization applying enterprise architecture and who want to understand the language. So it's about introducing the concepts. If you look at the syllabus, it's all about introducing the ADM techniques, applying the ADM, architecture governance, and so on. The enterprise architecture practitioner, now that's upper level. So if you're looking at the educational learning, this is about a focus on analysis and application and also a practical element, whereas foundation is about sort of understanding and remembering. So this is aimed at individuals who are going to be applying the TOGAF approach to actually developing. So this is basically the people who are actually, doing enterprise architecture, people who are actually contributing, to organizational transformation. We also think this will be useful for individuals who are working in agile environments who need to understand and apply EA. So that's a trend we're seeing more these days, people who are taking on agile methods, but they also now want to apply enterprise architecture for a bit more sort of, structure around the work that they're doing. So that syllabus that we cover here for the EA practitioner is very much a cycle of the ADM. So that's what we call the architecture development method. So if you're familiar with that, you're basically going around the different sort of phases, the different approaches of the architecture development method. The Enterprise Architecture Bridge, as I mentioned, this is the learning path for individuals who are already TOGAF 9 certified and allows them to bridge. That's what we call our way of sort of going between different releases of a certification. We always talk about let's have a bridge to bring people forward. What we've tried to do here is to recognize people's current knowledge investment. So if you've done TOGAF 9 certification, we offer you a reduced set of learning outcomes. And there is a separate bridge examination. So if you look at the examinations, if you were coming to it new, then you would take 2 exams, the part 1 and the part 2. That's a 1 hour followed by 90 minutes. For the bridge, it's just a single 1 hour exam. Now, the syllabus is very similar to the EA practitioner, although we have added, obviously, a little bit of information about what's changed. So, there is information about the changes as part of the syllabus. As I mentioned, we have an additional badge. So if you're attending an accredited training course, and this is what we include in an accredited training course is a set of what we call learning studies. So this is basically a practical element that we wanted to introduce. It was a bit of a criticism perhaps before that we didn't have much in the way of practical exercises. This is basically you're put into a case study, a scenario that was written by practicing enterprise architects from the Open Groups Architecture Forum based on their experiences, and you're put into a scenario. It's a digital transformation of an organization. You're put into different sort of situations as you go around the ADM, and you're asked basically what would the enterprise architect do next, and then you're given a choice of 4 possibilities and you have to pick the best one. It's not intended as a practice test or an exam. It's more something that you would work through in your class, you would work through with your trainer. It's really just to try and understand the thinking of practicing enterprise architects in these type of situations. Moving on to business architecture. So this is the other certification that we cover, new, basically for the 10th edition. So this shows the body of knowledge for Business Architecture Foundation. As I mentioned, we have a very rich set of business architecture in the TOGAF series guides, and we're able to draw our learning outcomes on those. Again, the scissors show that we're actually just drawing from those documents. Obviously, we basically pick all of the business architecture specific documents, but again, we will just do a small slice on some of the other documents, such as the leader's guide. These are the learning paths. We had an existing, or we still do have an existing certification credential, which is the blue badge shown there, Business Architecture Level 1, and it will be possible. We're just about to bring out a sort of what we call a migration path for that. Basically, you would take the additional modules to get to Business Architecture Foundation. The two are very closely related. What we've done is to basically take what we had as the certification credential syllabus, obviously refreshed for the 10th edition, and then added some of the new business architecture modules that are in the 10th edition to it. So you can either come from that path if you've already done it, or obviously take Business Architecture Foundation directly. Similarly, as we had for EA Foundation, so this is all about learning the fundamental concepts of business architecture, getting that business a basic understanding using the TOGAF approach. If you're familiar with the ADM, obviously this is really focusing on the first couple of phases, so going around to sort of phases A and B. Whereas the EA track will take you all around the ADM. We have a rich set of business architecture techniques that are covered. So what our target audience here obviously is those people who are interested in business planning, going around that sort of section of the ADM, and people who want to gain competencies in the techniques that I mentioned. There are at least six TOGAF series guides. So you'll come away with being able to, develop various business architecture artifacts. So there's, capability maps, value streams, information maps, organization maps, business scenarios. These are all techniques that you can take away and apply. Immediately after doing the course, you'll be able to start applying these techniques. So for that, that's a very good and useful sort of practical part of the business architecture course. As I mentioned, we have a number of certification credentials. I'll just briefly talk you through those. We have the TOGAF Framework Digital Specialist. So this is, as it says here, it's guidance on using the TOGAF framework, in the digital enterprise. So it's developing, maintaining, and applying the TOGAF standard specifically for digital enterprises. Guidance on digital technology adoption. So if you're thinking about, taking on some digital technology, we have what we call the readiness assessment technique. So you can assess the maturity of your business, of your organization, of your enterprise. As I mentioned, there is a prerequisite here of TOGAF Foundation or above. These are the benefits. So if you're an individual thinking about, well, why should I do this? Well, these are, the understanding, the knowledge that you will come away with. The Agile Specialist. So this was another area that we've added TOGAF series guides specifically to address in the TOGAF Standard 10th edition. So that's how to adapt and support the TOGAF Standard in an Agile environment, and also how to apply the TOGAF Standard with agility. So how you can actually do with EA with agility as well as working in Agile environments. In the working in Agile environments, we actually show you how to apply the TOGAF ADM using Agile Sprint. So again, written by the Open Group's experienced enterprise architects about how they would use the ADM in that situation. Again, a prerequisite of TOGAF Foundation or above. So these are the benefits that you would get from taking this short certification credential. So it's understanding agility, why it's important, how you can develop your EA in an agile way, how you can use sprints. Also some knowledge of some techniques for agile product management that we've got in the TOGAF series guides. The last certification credential I wanted to talk about is the leader. So that's about, how a leader can establish an enterprise architecture capability. Again, that's based on best practices. So again, written by experienced architects within the Open Group's Architecture Forum. So this is, again, a prerequisite of TOGAF Foundation or above. And these are the benefits. These are what the takeaways that you would get from taking this certification credential. So it's, understanding the key concepts, what should an EA leader be concerned about? How do I actually, go about, realizing, actually making an EA capability? How do I set up my practice? What is the purpose of a practice? How do I shape my organization? It's got, advice basically on a number of different areas, establishing your governance framework, what your architecture content should be in your repository, what sort of process model you should have for operations, and then looking at, roles and responsibilities and so on. So it's a specific guide, addressing all of that thinking. This was something that we hadn't particularly addressed before. So that's pretty much the three takeaways, the three sections I really wanted to talk through today. So I've given you a brief introduction to the standard, introduced what we mean by the TOGAF Certification Portfolio, so showed you the sort of a high-level view of the paths, and then obviously gone into the learning paths in detail. So